last class, I showed you all how to take your drawing or your image file, and I kind of showed two ways to import it into After Effects. So I had a Photoshop file. And so when you're importing footage, remember if you're just using it as a reference like I am here, so I just have a flat drawing right here and I'm just kind of working on top of it this whole time, just to kind of have something to work off of, is when you're importing in After Effects, you can just go to File and then Import and then locate your file right here. So File, Import File. And remember, we have our folder structure. So on our desktop, I've named my project AE Demo 2. And under here, I have the images folder, and this is the Photoshop file I was working with. And so when I imported it, I imported it as footage, and that imports it as a flat file. But again, if you've done like a lot of detailed work in Photoshop or Illustrator or whatever illustration software that you happen to be using, you can bring it in as a composition. And then when you import it, and you bring it in, it'll come in as its own composition right here. And every layer that existed within Photoshop or whatever program you're using comes in as its own independent layer right here. And so if you have like a detailed texture character that you're working on, that could be a good way to work. And the main way I'm going to be demonstrating is how to use shape layers here, right? So I just brought it in as a flat image here. And then since then, I've just been creating new shape layers in here in After Effects and constructing my character that way. So there's kind of two overall methods you can use. And if you do bring in your character, so if you did like a detailed illustration in Photoshop and you bring in your character into After Effects, the way that you use the puppet tool and these anchor points that I'm showing is exactly the same, right? So there's a lot of carryover between both techniques. It's just kind of different art layers that you can be using. So far, you can see I have this character right here. And in my Photoshop file, I was working a little bit bigger. So if I look at my composition, I have only one real composition here, which is Puppet Demo right here. And so I have my character in his own composition right here. And notice that this isn't the 1920 by 1080 HD composition that we usually work in for video. And that's because we're going to take this puppet composition and then put it into another HD composition for the final animation here. So when I go to composition and settings right here, you'll notice I'm working by 2048 by 2048 or like a 2K kind of setting right here. And so I would just say give yourself enough resolution to work with here. You know, it's much better to have a file that's too big rather than too small, but you don't need to go too crazy with it. So remember 1920 by 1080 is the standard HD setting, and I'm just working at basically 2000 by 2000, 24 frames per second. And then you can see right here, the duration is 20 seconds, which is, I'm giving myself some handle right there on that. So, and depending on the footage that you take with your phone, you might need to switch it from 24 frames per second to 29.97. So just when you bring in your footage, you'll just need to look at your footage and see what frame rate that is and then match it in this composition right here. So from there, kind of building this up. So I've made like a tiny amount of progress since last class, but not really. One thing you'll notice right here is I'm creating a new shape layer for each component right here. And notice here that I'm naming everything as I work with the character. And I'm also, at least for this instance, just because my initial drawing was black and white, I'm kind of working monochromatic, and then I'm going to change the colors and build in the colors after the fact here. You can kind of work like that, or you can change your colors in real time. I just kind of wanted to work on the draft first and then worry about the colors later. One thing that's really helpful here is you can notice this character is going to have a lot of articulation right here. And remember, we're going to be parenting layers together right here. So that when one thing moves, you know, there's like a nice hierarchy here. And a lot of layers are stacking up right here. And so I'm just going to press the button, the tilde button, just directly to the left of your number 1 key, and that'll bring the timeline to full screen right here. And so looking at my timeline right here, when you bring it in, it's probably going to look like this. Are these blue? So when you bring it in, it's going to look like this. And remember, each time I create a new shape layer, I press return and then I rename it right here. And you'll notice right here that I'm not even really that close to done with my character, and I already have 17 layers right here. So it's super important just to kind of name things as you go along. And then another thing that's helpful here is I like to color code things as I'm working right here. So for instance, I have my character's body right here, and the body is going to be the main component where everything's going to be parented to it eventually. So you can color code these, and you can do that just by right clicking. Let's see here. There we go. I'm sorry. So don't right click where the name is right here, but right click on the square that's directly to the left of it. And you have these options right here. And I like to just kind of give the body like a color that'll jump out, because that's one that's going to be really important. I'll be parenting a lot of things to it, and it'll just make it easier to find that layer. And then you can see right here that this arm right here, if I zoom in on it, is happening behind the body right there. So I have the thumb, arm one, and the fingers to arm one all behind there. So I would just right click on that and maybe make that yellow or something like that. And then I'm holding space bar and just panning down here a little bit. And so I have the fingers there, so that would be yellow as well. And then I have this leg right here, which is all one component. So I might give that its own color, so I just, when I rig puppets here, I like to name things clearly and then use color codes right here. So anything that's yellow is going to be that back arm. Orange is kind of right next to yellow on the color wheel, and it's the back leg right there. And then kind of moving forward, I have the front leg right here. So I might start to kind of move with a cooler palette on the top. So I made this leg right here cyan. And then finally with this front arm right here, I'm going to just make that like some kind of green or something. There's a green I like to use. All right, I'll just use the regular green for now. Okay, so I have some color code starting to happen right there. And from here, things are starting to get pretty close right here. I have the head right here. And using the same pen tool techniques that we've been using so far, I'm going to create the eye, the iris, the mouth, the teeth, the tongue, and then this second antenna right here. And so, but before that, I do that, I think it's kind of, this rig is kind of at a point right now where I can start to worry about some of my anchor points and show how to parent some things. It's already begun a little bit, but there's some more I need to do. So I have my head right here, and I'll make that red. And when I rotate the head, so I just select the head right here. And so you can either, to expand out the properties where you can animate different properties, you can press these arrows right here and get to the transform tab. Sometimes you'll see me just press it so it comes right to the rotation right there. So the shortcut I'm pressing right there is R. And if you want to scale, it's S. T is opacity. So there's some helpful shortcuts in there. I'll try to not use those shortcuts and do this a way that's easier to see here though. So I have the head right here, and you can see the anchor point is right there. And notice, since I highlighted it red, the path becomes red right there too. So it kind of helps it become visually easier to kind of differentiate as well. And when I rotate the head right now, it's rotating off of kind of a strange axis right here. And what I might want to do is take the opacity of all my layers down. So I selected all my layers, press T, and then I'm just bringing the opacity down to like 25 or something like that. Press T once more. And so now I can see my drawing underneath again. And remember, with my drawing, I drew these plus signs where I thought the anchor points should maybe go here for each component here. So for the head, the anchor point is currently right there, and I just need to move it right there. So if you remember changing the anchor point, you can either press this button right here, or you can tap Y on your keyboard, and then you just find the anchor point and then move it into position. And then from here, when I rotate the head, it kind of rotates from the right point right there. And what I want to do is I want to parent the head to the body right here. And so remember, to parent the head to the body, you just grab the spiral right here and that's next to the head, and then you drag it down to where the body is. And so now when I move the body, the head moves with it right there. And so we're kind of building a hierarchy structure right here. Is kind of the plan. And so I have the head right there. And eventually when I build the antennas, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, I'm going to parent all those things to the head, but that hasn't, I haven't created those yet. So we'll get there. So next up, I'm going to move on to this front arm right here. And so for the front arm, that's these green layers right here. And so I have the fingers. That's the finger 1. I have the thumb. I have the arm itself, and I have finger 2 and finger 3. And the reason I have finger 2 and finger 3 behind the arm is just due to the nature of the illustration. In the illustration, the index finger is kind of in front of the arm, and then the middle finger and the pinky finger are kind of behind. And so with all the fingers right here, so I'm just going to select the fingers and then a spiral and then connect them to the arm right here. So I'm just clicking on the spiral, connecting them to the arm. It looks like I've already done this. Click the spiral, connect them to the arm. And so now when I rotate the arm, you can see I've already moved the anchor point to where I have the cross right there. And so now when I rotate the arm, it kind of comes, it rotates along the right axis right there. And so now I just need to take the arm and parent it to the body, right? So just taking the arm and spiral, clicking the spiral and connecting it to the body. And so now when I click the body, things are starting to kind of move along here. And again, let's ignore those 2 components for right now. So you can see right here when I move the body, these fingers right here are attached to the body, but so that doesn't quite work. I need to attach them to the arm first and then attach the arm to the body again right there. And so if you remember, all of these kind of yellow and orange components were things that were behind, and you can see there's some parents that carried over to the body right there. And if you ever want to undo a parent, because that's not parented correctly, is you just go over to this tab right here. And if you don't see this tab, you can press these buttons on the bottom left and they'll kind of appear or reappear right there. You can see some kind of go away and you can make them reappear right there. Is I just click on the tab, I held shift and I selected all of them. And so I'm holding on the tab right here and I go to none, and that unparents them right there. And so now I can just hold command on my keyboard. And when you hold command, it allows you just to kind of select things out of order like this. So I selected my thumbs and the fingers of the back arm. And then if I click the spiral of any one of them and then just drag that to go to the arm right there, they're now parented to the arm. You can see I've already changed the anchor point of the arm to the right place. And so now I need to just take the arm and parent that to the body, which I highlighted fuchsia, and that makes it a little easier for me to find, when I'm doing this. So now you can see that this character, their upper body minus the details is lining up okay right here. So finally, I just need to do the legs. And so I have the rear leg right here. And you can see, again, in my drawing, I feel like the anchor point should be maybe around there. And so I just tap Y, the anchor point's up here, and I'm just going to bring it down into its position right here. And whenever I bring an anchor point into its position, I'll just press the select button to kind of get out of the anchor point mode. And then I'll expand this out. And I'll try just rotating it and see if it kind of has any kind of level of dexterity of what I want. I don't really need a ton of crazy movement with this character's leg right here. And so that's good enough right there. And so the leg, the anchor point's in the right position. And I'll now the body's the fuchsia one right there. So I just click the spiral, grab it, drag it to the body right there. And I test it real quick just to see if the leg moves with the body, which it does. And then finally, we got one more. So we got the front leg right here. And we can see the anchor points up here. So tap Y, bring the anchor point into a good position right here. Then I'll select the leg and expand this out and test the rotation. And this leg's really not going to move too much. So that's pretty good. I might want I feel like my cross mark's a little wrong right there. I might need it just to be a little bit lower than I have it drawn. And yeah, I just need a little bit of motion like that for my character. So now when I select the body right here, when I select the body right here, I need to still parent that leg. So I'm selecting that front leg, going over to the spiral, same as before, and just connecting it to the body. So there's kind of a hierarchy here. So the body I use as the main layer right here. to kind of physically move your character around. And the further your how do I say this? The further away a shape or an object is away from that core body, probably the lower on the hierarchy it's going to be in terms of the way you parent things right here. And the main way to test this hierarchy is just to kind of see if they kind of all move, relative to the way you want them to animate right here. And so that's essentially how I parent a character right here. And so again, this is creating a rig using the parenting system. If you recall last Tuesday, I showed you how to use the puppet tool because right now, the way that this thing rotates or moves is if I select this front arm, I can just simply rotate it right here. And then I can move the fingers independent of that right here. So I have that kind of level of control right here. So remember, this is kind of a simple rigging system. There's this option, and then there's the option of using the puppet tool. And remember, when you're using the puppet tool, it needs to just be, you can only use the puppet tool on one layer at a time right here. So let's just say, for instance, that I wanted to use the puppet tool on this rear arm right here. So the rear arm are these yellow layers right here, but you can see I have it separated out into all these different components right here. I have a thumb, arm, fingers right there. And so if I select the arm, and then I use the puppet tool like what I showed on Tuesday, is I can just click right here and create the puppet controls. When I move them, you can see the fingers don't move right there. And so what we need to do right here is I need to select the arm and the fingers. If, for instance, I wanted to use the puppet tool on this arm, but not this other one right here, so now we're kind of getting into some new techniques right here. So right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold shift and select the thumb, the arms, and not the leg right there. So all the yellow layers right there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-compose it. And what that simply does is it kind of combines all those elements together into their own composition that's nested within this one. And it kind of essentially makes these 4 different objects into one object, essentially. So it's kind of like if you were thinking about it as if this was on your desktop, it's like making a folder on your desktop, essentially. So to pre-compose it is I just hold shift and select these layers right here that are connected to that hand right there. Then I right click, and then I go down to pre-compose right here. So I'm just selecting them and then right clicking on where the names are, and then going to choosing pre-compose right here. And this gives me an opportunity to name it. So I'll call this rear arm right here and press OK. And so you can see it took those 4 or 5 layers and it combined it into this one right here. And so now let me bring this to full opacity right here. Oops, wrong thing. Oh, right. So you can see that the rear arm right here, it says it's at 100% opacity. And so whenever you do pre-compose something, it's making a composition within it. So you see that's the composition we just created right here. So this composition right here, you can find it in the directory right there. And if I double click it, it opens up that arm that I created right there. And so the opacity right now on these is low. So I just need to hold shift, select all those layers. And if I've selected all the layers at the same time and I move the opacity up, all their opacity goes up at the same time right there. And so now that arm is contained onto one layer right there. And if I do the puppet tool now, so I'm just going to save this real quick before I keep going. I think it's good to get in the habit of saving incrementally as you work. So now when I do the puppet tool, so I'll just start on the shoulder, and always start towards the base of the object. So start on the shoulder or start on the hip and then move outward, move on to the elbow and then move towards the hand right there. And then if I move this hand, you can see the whole thing moves together right there. Whereas before it was just the arm moving and not the fingers right there. And so for this character right here, just the way I imagine this character moving, I feel like this rear arm, I might like to use the puppet handles right here. And then for the front arm that's over here, I would probably prefer it just to have a rotate point right there, just due to the way I imagine this particular character moving right here. And so at this point, this character is starting to kind of come together a little bit. I need to change the colors. and I need to add details to the head here, but it's, you know, when I move the body right here, everything kind of follows suit with it. Oh, one last thing is the rear arm. When I did the puppet tool, notice when I move the body that that rear arm no longer moves with it right here. So what I need to do is I need to just do that step one more time with the rear arm, where I press Y, change the anchor point to the correct position, and then parent this arm to the rest of the body right there. And so now when I select the body, the whole arm moves along with it right here. And so for the mouth and the eyes in this last antenna, I'm going to continue to use the same techniques I was using before for this character right here. And before I kind of break from this demo and let you all kind of continue to work on your projects right here, I just want to re-show this technique one more time that I showed yesterday, which was, you can see that this character has outlines to them. But if you look at this front arm right here, you can see that the line ends, has a beginning and an end right there. And so if you're using a character that doesn't have outlines, then you don't really need to worry about this. But I think it's good to kind of know these techniques right here. So remember, each time that I'm creating a new component right here, I'm making a new shape for them. So I'm just going to layer, new shape before I draw a new component on this character right here. And you can see I'm going to drag this all the way to the top right here and call this demo. And whenever you create a new shape layer, you can have multiple shapes on that layer. It's just it's easier to manipulate when you keep them all separated out like this, because you can kind of rig them all together right here. But what I wanted to show right here is, so I made a new shape layer right here. You can see when I create the shape layer, the fill is going to be this color right here. The stroke is going to be black, and the stroke is going to have 8 pixels right there. And so you can see on this antenna, for instance, at the base of it, the outline doesn't go all the way around it right there. So there's 2 ways you can do that. You can either just, the simpler way is you can just, if I were drawing this antenna again, is I would start my base right here, build out the antenna, you know, bring it out to its point right here. And then remember, I'm clicking and dragging to get this Bezier handle, and you can hold spacebar, and that allows you to change the anchor point as you're going right there. And what I would do is I would just bring the point right there and then press V to close it off, and then that ends it right there. And remember that once you've drawn something, you can always click on these anchor points right here, and you can still change them really easily just by clicking on the main anchor point, which is right here. And there's also these Bezier handles right here where you can continue to adjust the shape of things. When I'm using this technique, and this is the same way I treat things in Illustrator, Illustrator is really similar, is I try to create these shapes with as few points as possible right here. So this antenna started here, created one center point, end point, one center point, and then one more end point right there. So 6 total right there. And if I started to add 8 or something like that, it'll start to get a little wobbly in there. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. You can see right here, compared to this upper one right here, the strokes end in a rounded shape like that. And then this one's got these hard edges like this. And the hard edges are usually look a little amateur, and it can kind of fit into the style, but most of the time for a character like this, you're probably going to want some kind of rounded edge to it. And so in order to do that, you just click on the shape layer right here, and we're going to adjust the stroke right here. And it's actually a little similar to Illustrator as well. So in order to kind of change the parameters, we just open up the shape layer, go under contents, continue to open it up right here. So remember, with any shape layer, you have the path. So if you use the pen tool or whatever, the path that you drew is going to be this layer right here. We have the fill layer, which is just another way of saying this green layer right here, which we can always change. All these layers are very editable here, so we can continue to change them as we work. And then in between them, we have the stroke layer right there. So I'll open that up. You can see I could hypothetically change my stroke to be red right here by either changing the color right there or changing the color in here. And I can change the opacity of it. But if you look down here under stroke width, there's the line cap right here. And so the butt cap is the name of the cap that's got the hard edge to it. And if you just click it down to rounded cap right there, it rounds it out for you right there. So that's one way to kind of, if you're using a character with outlines, to create shapes where you know, that outline ends. Because if you look at Cartoon Network or most cartoons, there's going to be, you know, how do I say this? The character is not going to have a full outline going over every single object right there. So that's one way to do it. And then another way to do it is, let's say that I have drawn, so I'll make another shape layer, new shape layer right here, and I'll press return to rename this. So I'm just typing return. That's a good shortcut for renaming, and I'll call this demo 2 right there. And for this one, I'm going to use the pen tool, which again is this tool right here. And remember, you can click on this pen tool and you can add new anchor points or change anchor points that have a hard edge or add a Bezier handle to them using these controls right here. So the pen tool expands out. So I can draw this out right here, and I'm going to draw out a similar shape right here. And this time I'm going to close it off. So remember, when you close things off, you're bringing... Oh, I will show that. Yeah. So, yeah, I'll show that right now. So with this pen tool right here, you see there's a circle next to it. So that's giving you an indication that you're about to close off your loop. And it just happens when you bring it to your initial anchor point right there. And yeah, so that's a good question. So the reason that this is pixelating right here is because my media disk cache is getting full. And so let me go ahead and save this. And so I'll finish this thought here in just a moment. So when I saved it, it kind of knocked it out for me right there. So sometimes when you save your projects, that'll help it. But most of the time, the way that you fix that is, I don't know if y'all remember this. I haven't spent too much time talking about this yet, but with the preview right here, whenever you preview a new image, After Effects is essentially saving that rendered image into something called your media disk cache, which is stored on your computer. And it fills up pretty quick. So if you're working on a computer that doesn't have a ton of space on it, you'll just need to kind of do this pretty often. Like usually when I'm working, I do this. If I'm working a full day in After Effects, I'll do this 3 times, you know, in After Effects just to clear things out. And so what you do is you go to After Effects, Preferences, and then down to Media Disk Cache. So it's just After Effects, Preferences, and then Media and Disk Cache right here. And this window will come up. And right now, my Media and Disk Cache, the folder, its maximum disk size is 46 gigabytes. And right now it's going under my users folder. And usually, I honestly, if I'm working professionally, I'll stick an external hard drive on my computer and set this folder to just go to some external hard drive. But so you can choose the location of where your disk cache goes, but you can just leave it in the default most of the time. And essentially what you just need to do is just open this window and go to empty media disk cache right here. And so you can see right here that 46 gigabytes was my maximum right there. And it got filled up. And that's why I was pixelating just then. And so it's asking me, do I want to clear it out? And I say yes. And so essentially it deletes all those rendered images that are just eating up space on your computer and slowing everything down. And so, yeah, it's if your screen starts to pixelate, or if After Effects starts to really chug on you, this will fix it 99% of the time. Is if you just go to After Effects, Preferences, Media Disk Cache right here, and then it's just this one right here. And it's grayed out now because I just did it, but the empty disk cache right there will clear that out. So, yeah, good question. Sometimes I've kind of been trained just to ignore it when it happens because it happens so much. I wasn't even like mentally acknowledging that it was pixelating. So I showed how you can kind of close off or not close off a point on this shape right here. And I did it just by using the pen tool and drawing it in. And so another way you can do it right here. So let's just say that you already have a shape drawn and you've closed it off and you want to have a hole punched into it. One way you can do it is so I'm on this layer right here, this new shape layer, and I'll solo it just so we're only looking at that layer. And so the way to do this is if I expand it out under contents, we have the path, the stroke, and the fill. And I'm going to add a new category in here called trim path. And that allows me, oh man, I already did it again. Okay. And that allows me to cut a hole in it here. So if I click this plus button and then go down to trim paths right here, what this does is you can see this new folder was created right here. And I know it's pixelated. Oh, there we go. It fixed itself. My computer's acting up today. we have the start, the end, and the offset. And I began to show this last class, but if I do the start, you can see that the stroke right here. So this was the initial, or I think the initial point I drew was down here, but beside the point, the start goes from 0 to 100 right here. So if I drag the start point to 100, it kind of, so this is 0, and as I drag it up to 100 right here, it kind of starts to close off the whole thing right here. And so generally speaking, oops, sorry, my computer's freezing. Come on. So generally speaking, when you start things off, the start is going to be at 0 right here, and the endpoint is going to be at 100, and that's what's going to make it look normal. And so what we can do here is we can change, you can change the start and the end, but then additionally there's the offset. And what offset does is it rotates where that start point begins along this path that we've created right here. And so there we go. This is my computer freaking out, is making this look like it's more difficult than it is. Let's see here. I'm still frozen. Thanks. So sometimes what happens was when I do a screen capture, my computer does not care for that, and it slows things down right here. It is fully frozen. Okay. So let's see if I type this in, because my mouse is the only thing that's frozen right here, maybe. Okay. So you can see the endpoint right here as I drag that in, that the endpoint changes right there. And so if I wanted there to be an opening right here at the base of the antenna, is I could just give myself a little bit of a gap just by changing the start point right here. And then now offset rotates where that start point is. So I can just click on this offset and change where that is right there. And you can see you can start to get some stylized looks with this if that's what you're shooting for right there. But I can just make some, yep, my mouse is still frozen. So I'm just gonna do it this way. So you can change your start and your endpoint right here. And remember, same as before, to kind of add, so this is the butt cap right here, and I want it to be a round cap. So I just go under stroke, and then underneath stroke width, there's the butt cap right there, and you just go to round cap right there, and it rounds it out for you right there. And so if you already have a shape that's closed off and you want to create an opening in the path right there, it's a trim path is what it's called. And it's pretty simple to operate, and kind of, especially within the context of motion design, there's some really cool animation techniques you can use when we kind of expand out that technique right there. So yeah, those are kind of two ways that we can create outlines right there. And so just to kind of recap what I talked about here today is I kind of talked about how to continue to organize your puppet comp right here, how to color code things, and how to pre-compose something. And we're going to use pre-composing a whole lot right here. So for instance, right here, I wanted to use the puppet tool on this back arm right here, but remember to use the puppet tool. It only works when everything's merged into one layer. And I had 4 or 5 shape layers right there. So I had 4 or 5 shape layers right here. I held shift and selected them all, and then I right-clicked and went down to pre-compose right there, and I renamed it, and I created this rear arm pre-composition right here, and it essentially merges them all into one folder right here, and it keeps it in this place. And I was able to add the puppet tool to it. One note here is when you're using the puppet tool, it shows up as an effect right here, and so this is the layer. I added the puppet pinpoints, and it shows up as an effect right here. And so you click on puppet, you go down to mesh, and then you have to go into deform. You have to just keep going in the menu after menu here. But then eventually you get to these pinpoints right here, and you can see these keyframes show up. So usually you'll just, for an arm like this, I have 3 anchor points, and the only ones I would need to animate are pinpoint 2 and 3 right here. And so you just have to keep expanding it out until you get to deform, and then you get to these pinpoints right here. And you can see that there's these keyframes that you can create right there in this section right here. And to animate it, I can just click off of it, and I can click these keyframes and move it around. And you can see the puppet tool allows you to kind of bend the layers like this, and it creates animations like that where you can kind of continue to move it out. So to find the puppet keyframes is a little hard to find. One, you just have to kind of keep clicking into it. And let's see here. Very last note right here is once you have your character fully rigged and ready to go, what I recommend doing is, so I already have some anchor points that are automatically drawn in for these pen tools. So these are kind of one thing I would like to animate. Another thing I'd like to animate is, for instance, the head, the rotation of the head right here. And so on that same point, which is at the beginning of my animation, I might go under the rotation of my head right here just by clicking that tab open and finding rotation. If you click the stopwatch, it creates a keyframe right there just for the default position of the head. And let's just create one more keyframe for this shoulder right here for the front arm. And so for the front arm, it's this layer right here. And I'll click the stopwatch next to it just to create a keyframe there. And so you can see if I press the tilde button right here next to 1, we can see I've created some keyframes under the head, the front arm, shoulder, and then this rear arm right here with the puppet tools. And something cool you can do here is, there's a bunch of layers that we're having to juggle right now. And when it comes time to animate, it can turn into a lot really quickly when you're working. But one shortcut that I find to be really helpful here is I select all my layers right here. So I just hold shift and select all my layers. And if I type in U right here, and so U as an underline is the shortcut. So I hold shift and select all the layers. Can you see it only expanded out the layers that have keyframes on them right there? So the idea right there is I created an empty keyframe essentially on each layer that I plan to animate. And then I held shift, selected all my layers, then I typed U, and it only expanded out the layers that need animation on them. And so that's, using that shortcut can be a really helpful way of making your timeline manageable right here when it comes time to animate. Does anyone have any questions on any of this here? Cool. So I don't know what is going on with my mouse right now. So let's see here. For the rest of the class, I want to give you all some time to kind of work on your puppets and make progress. And you can ask me questions here as you're working. And we'll take a break soon, but let's work for a little bit first. So